Welcome to this channel. Sit back and relax and get ready to listen to incredible stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
The first thing I noticed was the weight of my own eyelids. Not the room, not the beeping, not the antiseptic smell that had burrowed into the walls of my unconsciousness like a tenant who refused to pay rent. Just the weight. As if someone had sewn coins into my lashes while I slept, as if gravity had chosen that one small flap of skin to make its final stand. I opened them. White ceiling, fluorescent hum, the kind of light that doesn't illuminate so much as interrogate. And then, sound, a gasp, a chair scraping backward, footsteps, heavy, uneven, the gait of a man who had forgotten how to hope and was now relearning the choreography of it all at once. Claire, David's voice, cracked at the edges, wet. I turned my head, or tried to. The motion cost me something I couldn't name. My neck felt like rusted hinges, like a gate that had been chained shut through 3 seasons of weather. But I managed. Just enough to see him. He looked older. That was my first coherent thought. Not different. Older. As if the months had been years, as if time had been chewing on him while I was away, gnawing at the architecture of his face. His hair, usually so carefully arranged, stood up in graying clumps. His eyes were swollen, the skin beneath them bruised the color of old plums. He wore a sweater I didn't recognize, navy blue, cashmere probably. David had always been particular about fabrics. "You're awake." He said it like a prayer and a verdict at once, like he couldn't decide whether to kneel or run. Oh God. Oh my God, Claire, you're awake. He reached for my hand. His fingers were cold, trembling. I wanted to squeeze back. I wanted to tell him I was thirsty, that my mouth felt like it had been packed with cotton and regret, that the light was too bright, and the silence in the room had a texture I didn't understand. But my throat wouldn't cooperate. It felt lined with sandpaper, with the dust of rooms no one had entered in decades. Don't try to talk. He was crying now, openly. The tears ran down the grooves beside his nose, pooled at the corners of his mouth, dripped onto the blanket covering my chest. The doctors said, "It might take time. Your vocal cords. The intubation. 3 months, Claire. You've been gone for 3 months. 3 months." I let the numbers settle into me like sediment. 3 months of what? Of where? The last thing I remembered was, what? I grasped for the thread, but it dissolved between my fingers. There had been dinner. Hadn't there? A Tuesday. I had been tired. More tired than usual. I'd gone to bed early. And then? Nothing. Just the dark. Not even dreams. Just a black so complete it felt less like sleep, and more like being folded into something that had no end. David was still talking, his words tumbling over each other like stones in a landslide. The doctors, the poisoning, the carbon monoxide, a faulty detector. A miracle I was alive. He had found me in the morning, barely breathing, blue around the lips. The ambulance. The ICU. The coma. The waiting. "I never left," he said, and his grip tightened. I slept in the chair. Every night, I told them I wouldn't go home, not without you. I believed him. In that first hour, I believed every word. Why wouldn't I? He was my husband. 5 years. 5 years of morning coffee and shared newspapers, of him remembering how I took my tea, of the way he looked at me across crowded rooms as if I were the only fixed point in a spinning world. We had been happy, hadn't we? The question flickered and died before it could catch flame. A nurse came in, young, red-haired. She checked my vitals with the brisk efficiency of someone who had seen too many awakenings to be surprised by any of them. She smiled at me, but it didn't reach her eyes. There was something else there. Pity? Or was I imagining it, projecting the fog of my own confusion onto her professional mask? "Welcome back, Mrs. Bennett," she said. "You've got a lot of people rooting for you." Mrs. Bennett? The name sounded strange, distant, as if she were talking about someone she had read about in a magazine. They ran tests. Endless tests. Lights in my eyes, needles in my arms, the cold press of a stethoscope against skin that felt newly born, oversensitive, raw. David stayed through all of it. He held my hand when they explained the paralysis. Temporary, they said. The word hung in the air like a promise made by someone who wasn't sure they could keep it. Nerve damage from the prolonged hypoxia. My brain had protected itself by shutting down certain pathways. Below the waist, the signals were interrupted. Not severed. Interrupted. With physical therapy, with time, there was every reason to believe I would walk again. Every reason to believe. I clung to that phrase. It had the shape of hope, but the weight of uncertainty. David cried again when they told us. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking, and I watched him from the pillow, unable to reach out, unable to do anything but stare at the part in his hair, at the way his scalp showed through in a thin pink line. I wanted to comfort him. The impulse was instinctive, automatic. My husband was suffering. I should comfort him. But I couldn't move my legs. I couldn't feel them at all. It was the strangest kind of absence. Not pain, not numbness, just nothing. As if the lower half of my body had been erased from the map of my consciousness, as if someone had drawn a line at my waist and labeled everything below it. Here, be dragons. They moved me to a rehabilitation facility 2 weeks later. David packed my things with the meticulous care he applied to everything, folding my nightgowns into perfect squares, arranging my toiletries in the order I preferred, slipping a photograph of us into the zippered pocket of my bag. Our wedding day. I was laughing at something the photographer had said. David was looking at me, not the camera, his expression so open it made my chest ache to see it. "You'll be home soon," he said, kissing my forehead. "I'll have everything ready. The bedroom, the bathroom. I already ordered a shower chair. And the ramp. For the wheelchair. It'll be like you never left." The wheelchair. I hadn't fully accepted it yet. The word felt like a foreign object in my mouth. I was 34 years old. I ran 3 times a week. I danced at weddings. I climbed the steep staircase of my grandmother's house, the house I had grown up in, the house that still smelled of her lavender sachets and old wood, without holding the railing. Now I was being taught how to wheel myself down a hallway without tipping over, how to transfer from chair to bed without falling, how to accept help in the bathroom from strangers who spoke in gentle, impersonal tones. David visited every day. He brought flowers, tulips, my favorite. He brought books, the literary fiction I loved, thick novels with sentences that unspooled like thread. He read to me when my eyes grew tired, his voice filling the small room, making it feel less like a hospital and more like a place where life might eventually resume. He was a good husband. Everyone said so. The nurses commented on it. The other patients, wheeling past my open door, would nod in his direction with expressions of envy or admiration. "Your husband never misses a day. You're lucky." I was lucky. I repeated it to myself like a mantra, like a charm against the dark thoughts that sometimes crept in at the edges. The thoughts that whispered, "Why can't you remember? Why is there nothing before the dark? Why does his sweater look new, and why does that bother you?" I pushed them away. I was healing. I was grateful. I was alive. It was on my 23rd day of rehabilitation that I saw the letter. David had stepped out to take a call. His phone had buzzed, an unusual occurrence. He usually kept it on silent for me, and he had frowned at the screen, mumbled something about work, and disappeared into the hallway. I was alone. The afternoon light was slanting through the blinds, striping the bed with gold and shadow. My wheelchair sat beside me, empty, waiting. I was supposed to be practicing transfers, but I had begged off, claiming fatigue. The truth was, I hated the chair. I hated what it represented. I hated the way it made me feel broken. On the rolling tray table next to the water pitcher and the untouched Jell-O cup was a stack of mail. David had brought it from home. "Your correspondence," he'd said, with a little smile. "Nothing urgent. Bills, mostly. I can handle those. But I thought you might want to feel connected." I had thanked him. I hadn't looked at it. Until now. I reached for the pile. My arms were strong, at least. The physical therapy had focused on preserving upper body strength, on teaching me to compensate for what I had lost. I could lift myself. I could pull myself. I could drag my useless legs from one surface to another with the grim determination of someone refusing to be entirely defeated. The first envelope was a credit card statement. I set it aside. The second was a hospital bill, the numbers so large they seemed abstract, theoretical. The third was cream-colored, heavy stock. The kind of paper that announced importance before a single word was read. I turned it over. The return address was printed in elegant serif font, Holloway and Associates, residential real estate. My heart did something strange, a flutter, a hitch, like a record skipping. I opened it. "Dear Mrs. Bennett, it is our distinct pleasure to congratulate you on the successful sale of your property at 42 Maplewood Lane. The closing proceeded without complication, and the funds have been transferred to the designated account as per your husband's instructions. We hope this transaction brings you satisfaction and wish you the very best in your future endeavors. Warm regards, Margaret Holloway, Senior Broker." I read it 3 times, then 4. The words didn't change. They remained fixed on the page, black ink on cream paper, arranged in sentences that followed the rules of grammar and logic and yet made no sense at all. "The successful sale of your property. 42 Maplewood Lane. Your husband's instructions. Maplewood Lane. My grandmother's house. My house. The house I had inherited 5 years ago when she died. The house where I had learned to bake cookies and read by flashlight under the covers and cry over my first heartbreak. The house with the wraparound porch and the oak tree in the front yard that I had climbed until I was 16. The house David and I had talked about renovating, about filling with children, about growing old in together. Sold. Closed. Funds transferred. I heard footsteps in the hallway. David's voice. Low. Urgent. I shoved the letter beneath my thigh, a movement born of instinct rather than thought. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my temples, in the hollow of my throat. He entered, pocketing his phone, his face rearranging itself into the mask of concerned husband. "Everything okay?" he asked. I looked at him, really looked at him, the new lines around his eyes, the way his smile didn't quite reach the left side of his mouth. The navy sweater, still unfamiliar, still wrong. "Fine," I said. My voice came out rough, unused, but steady. "Just tired." He nodded, relieved, and launched into a story about his colleague, something mundane and cheerful, and I nodded in the right places and smiled at the right moments, and all the while the letter burned against my skin like a brand, like a secret that had finally grown too hot to hold. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark, listening to the rhythm of the rehabilitation center, the coughs and whispers and the soft beeping of machines keeping people alive. I thought about the letter. I thought about David's tears. I thought about the 5 years of marriage that suddenly felt like a stage set, like a painted backdrop that might peel away if I scratched hard enough. Your husband's instructions. When had I given him instructions? When had I signed anything? I couldn't remember signing a power of attorney. I couldn't remember agreeing to sell. I couldn't remember anything from before the coma, but even so, this felt wrong. Fundamentally, cellularly wrong. Maplewood Lane wasn't just property. It was my spine, my history, the geographical coordinates of everything I had ever been. I would never have sold it. Not without a reason so compelling it would have eclipsed every other priority. And yet, the doctors said the carbon monoxide had been accidental, a faulty detector. A miracle I survived. David had found me in the morning, barely breathing. But when I searched my memory, there was no morning. There was no night before. There was just the dark, absolute and unbroken, stretching backward from the moment I opened my eyes in the hospital. What if there was nothing to remember because there had been nothing accidental about it? The thought arrived fully formed, like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples it sent outward touched everything. I tried to dismiss it. I tried to call it paranoia, trauma, the psychological fallout of a brain that had been starved of oxygen and was now misfiring. But it wouldn't leave. It sat in the corner of my mind, watching me, waiting. The next morning, I asked David to bring me my laptop. He hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. A blink too long. Are you sure? He asked. The doctors said to take it slow. Screen time might give you headaches. I need to check my email, I said. Work stuff. I don't want them to think I've vanished. Another hesitation. Then a smile. Warm. Patient. Of course. I'll bring it tomorrow. But he didn't. He forgot, he said. Or the battery was dead. Or he couldn't find the charger. Each excuse was plausible. Each excuse was reasonable. Each excuse arrived with a kiss on my forehead and a promise that he would absolutely, definitely bring it the next day. On the fourth day, I stopped asking. Instead, I started watching. I watched the way he interacted with the nurses. Too friendly, perhaps? Or carefully, precisely friendly, the way a man might be who was conscious of being observed. I watched the way he handled my medical records, the ease with which he discussed my prognosis, my medications, my treatment plan. He knew the names of drugs I couldn't pronounce. He knew the schedules of my therapies. He moved through the bureaucracy of my illness with the confidence of someone who had been preparing for it. Preparing. The word lodged in my chest like a splinter. One afternoon, while he was in the bathroom, I wheeled myself to the small closet where he kept his jacket and his bag. My arms burned with the effort. I was still weak, still learning the geometry of momentum and balance, but I made it. I was quiet. The wheelchair's rubber wheels made only the softest whisper against the linoleum. His bag was leather, expensive, the one I had bought him for our 3rd anniversary. I opened it. Inside, his wallet, his keys, a bottle of hand sanitizer, a granola bar, and a folder. Manila. Unlabeled. I pulled it out with trembling fingers, flipped it open. The first page was a document from the county clerk's office. Petition for appointment of guardian. My name was on it. Claire Bennett. Incapacitated adult. David had filed it 11 days after I entered the coma. The court had granted it 2 weeks later. David Bennett. Guardian of the person and estate of Claire Bennett. Guardian. Of my estate. I stared at the word until it lost its meaning, until it became just shapes, just sounds. Guardian. As if I were a child. As if I were incompetent. As if the woman he had married, the woman who had managed her own finances and run her own business and made her own decisions for 34 years, had ceased to exist the moment she closed her eyes. Beneath the guardianship papers were bank statements. Our joint account. I scanned the transactions, my eyes moving faster and faster, my breath coming shallow and quick. Withdrawals. Large ones. Tens of thousands. Transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. And then, the deposit. The sale of Maplewood Lane. The number was staggering. 7 figures. My grandmother's house, the house built by my great-grandfather in 1923, the house with the clawfoot tub and the stained glass windows and the fireplace where I had hung my Christmas stockings, had been sold for a sum that would have taken me decades to earn. The money was gone, not spent, moved, transferred again and again, layered through accounts like sediment, like a river delta spreading out into a sea I couldn't trace. I heard the toilet flush. I shoved the folder back into the bag, my hands clumsy with haste and fear. I wheeled myself back to the bed, my heart thundering, my palms slick with sweat. I had just managed to arrange myself in a plausible position when David emerged, adjusting his cuffs, smiling. "Ready for lunch?" he asked. I looked at him. At the man who had wept at my bedside. At the man who had filed papers to declare me legally dead while I was still breathing. At the man who had sold my history and scattered the money to the winds. "Starving," I said. That night I didn't sleep either. But this time, it wasn't confusion that kept me awake. It was clarity. Terrible, crystalline clarity. David had done this. David had done something to me, poisoned me, drugged me, arranged the carbon monoxide. I didn't know the mechanism yet, but I knew the result. He had put me in a coma. He had rushed to court while I was unconscious. He had had me declared incapacitated. And then he had sold the house. But why? The money, obviously. But David had money. His family had money. He earned well as a financial consultant. We had never wanted for anything. What could possibly motivate him to destroy me so completely? Unless there was something else. Unless the money wasn't the goal, but the means. Unless he needed to liquidate the house quickly, quietly, before I could wake up and stop him. Unless he hadn't expected me to wake up at all. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, it settled over me like a cold mantle, like armor. I felt something shift in my chest, some fundamental rearrangement of the furniture of myself. The Claire who had trusted, who had loved, who had believed in the narrative of her own good fortune, that Claire was receding, fading like a photograph left in the sun. In her place was someone harder, someone angrier, someone who had nothing left to lose but the truth. I needed proof. The guardianship papers were legal, if predatory. The bank statements showed movement of funds, but not criminality. I needed something that would stand up in a court of law. Something that would prove David had intentionally caused my coma. Something that would undo the sale and restore what was mine. And I needed to do it from a wheelchair, in a rehabilitation center, under the nose of a man who visited every day and watched me with eyes that were suddenly, undeniably, assessing. The next week was a performance. I smiled. I thanked him. I let him feed me soup and read me novels and hold my hand during physical therapy. I played the grateful wife, the recovering patient, the woman too overwhelmed by her own survival to ask uncomfortable questions. All the while, I was planning. The first thing I needed was access to information. My laptop was out of the question. David had taken it home, he said, to keep it safe, and I knew better than to ask again. But the rehabilitation center had a computer lab for patients. A row of desktops, old and slow, available during designated hours. I signed up for a slot. David had a meeting, he said. He wouldn't be there until the afternoon. I wheeled myself to the lab. My arms were stronger now. The therapists had pushed me hard, and I had pushed myself harder, driven by a rage I disguised as determination. I could wheel for 20 minutes without stopping. I could navigate doors and ramps and the slight incline of the hallway that had once seemed like a mountain. The computer was ancient, the keyboard sticky with the residue of 1,000 anxious fingers, but it worked. I opened a browser. I typed in the address of our home security system. We had installed cameras 3 years ago. After a break-in 2 houses down, David had insisted. Better safe than sorry, he'd said, and I had agreed, grateful for his protectiveness. There were 4 cameras: front door, back door, driveway, and, at my insistence, the attic. The attic had been my grandmother's domain, filled with trunks and boxes and the accumulated evidence of 4 generations. I had worried about leaks, about squirrels, about the water heater that lived up there. David had indulged me, installing the camera with a little smile that I had interpreted as affectionate patience. I typed in the login. Access denied. I tried again. Same password I had used for years, the one based on my grandmother's birthday, the one David had helped me choose because he said it was memorable, but not obvious. Access denied. He had changed it. Of course he had. He had changed the password, probably the same week he filed for guardianship. The cameras were still there. I could see the live feed on the login page. 4 small windows showing the empty house, the overgrown lawn, the driveway where my car no longer sat. But I couldn't access the archives. I couldn't see what had happened on the night I fell into the dark. I sat back in my wheelchair, staring at the screen, my mind racing. There had to be another way. Physical security systems stored footage locally on a hard drive, usually in the house itself. If the cameras were still active, the system was still recording. The hard drive would be in the attic, near the router, where David had installed it. I remembered the day clearly now, how he had climbed the narrow stairs, how he had emerged dusty and triumphant, how he had shown me the blinking lights on the black box and said, "All set. We're safe. If I could get to the house, if I could get inside, if I could climb those stairs." But I couldn't walk. I couldn't drive. I was trapped in this facility, dependent on David for transportation, for access, for everything. Unless I thought about the nurses. The red-haired one, Sarah, who had been kind to me in a way that felt genuine. The older one, Marcus, who talked about his own divorce with a candor that suggested he understood something about broken trust. The physical therapist, Jen, who pushed me hard and celebrated my small victories with the enthusiasm that felt like friendship. I needed an ally, someone who could get me out of here, even for a few hours, someone who wouldn't ask too many questions, someone who would understand or at least not stand in my way. I chose Jen. She came to my room the next morning for our session, her ponytail swinging, her sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. She was 27, I knew. She had a tattoo of a phoenix on her wrist. She had mentioned once, in passing, that she had rebuilt her life after a bad relationship. "Sometimes the fire saves you," she'd said, and I had nodded without understanding. "How's the transfer game today?" she asked, setting up the parallel bars. "I need to ask you something," I said, "and I need you to not react, to not look at me differently, to just listen." She paused. Her eyes, green and direct, met mine. "Okay," she said. "I think my husband tried to kill me." I said it flatly, without emotion. I had rehearsed it in my head 100 times, trying to find the version that sounded least like a paranoid delusion. This was the best I could do. Jen didn't laugh. She didn't call for a psychiatrist. She didn't step back. She just looked at me, her head tilted slightly, her expression unreadable. "Why?" she asked. And so I told her. The letter, the guardianship papers, the bank statements, the changed password, the cameras. I laid it out like evidence, like a case I was building, And when I finished, my voice was hoarse but steady. Jen was quiet for a long moment. Then she sat down on the edge of my bed, her elbows on her knees, her hands clasped. My ex, she said slowly, used to tell me I was crazy whenever I asked questions. About the credit card charges, about the late nights, about the perfume on his collar. You're imagining things, he'd say. You're too sensitive. You need help. It took me 2 years to realize that the crazy-making was the abuse, that he wanted me to doubt my own mind. She looked up at me. If you're wrong, the worst that happens is you look foolish. If you're right, and you do nothing, he wins. I need to get to my house, I said. The security footage is there, on a hard drive, in the attic. If I can get it. David visits every afternoon, Jen interrupted. You have a 3-hour window in the mornings. If we time it right, if you're back before he arrives. We? She smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting for a chance to fight back, even if the fight wasn't hers. I have a car, she said, and I have Tuesdays off. Tomorrow. Tomorrow. The word felt enormous, like a door opening onto a landscape I couldn't yet see. We planned it like a heist, because that's what it was, in a way. A theft of truth. A breaking and entering into my own life. Jen would sign me out for a community outing. She would drive me to Maplewood Lane. I would have 90 minutes to find the hard drive, copy the relevant footage, and get back. She would stay in the car, engine running, ready to move. Are you sure? I asked her the night before, as she helped me into bed. If this goes wrong, it won't, she said, but her voice was gentle. And if it does, I'll say you threatened me, that you stole my keys, that I had no idea what you were planning. I'll protect myself, Claire, but I won't let you do this alone. I didn't sleep that night either, but for the first time since I woke up, the sleeplessness felt like preparation rather than torture. The morning was gray, the sky low and heavy with unshed rain. Jen wheeled me out through a side entrance, her movements brisk and efficient, her expression neutral. We passed no one who knew us. The facility was understaffed on Tuesdays, the hallways quiet. Her car was a battered Honda Civic, the back seat folded down to accommodate my wheelchair. She helped me transfer, a maneuver we had practiced until it was smooth, until it looked routine, and stowed the chair in the back. I sat in the passenger seat, my legs useless, my hands clenched in my lap, and watched the city scroll past the window. We didn't speak. There was nothing to say that wouldn't have sounded like doubt or hope, and I couldn't afford either. Maplewood Lane looked different. That was my first thought as we turned onto the street. Smaller, somehow. The oak tree in the front yard seemed to lean at a different angle. The paint on the porch was peeling in new places. The lawn was overgrown, the grass reaching toward the knees of the picket fence, and there was a for sale sign lying on its side in the flower bed, the word sold plastered across it in aggressive red. My house. My home. Sold to strangers. Empty. Waiting for demolition or renovation or whatever the new owners had planned. Jen pulled into the driveway. The garage door was closed. The windows were dark. 90 minutes, she said. Starting now. I nodded. I pulled the wheelchair from the back, my arms screaming with the effort, and transferred myself into it. The motion was easier now, almost automatic. My body was learning to compensate, to redistribute, to make do with what it had. The front door was locked. Of course. David had the keys. But I knew the house better than he did. I knew the loose board on the back porch, the one that hid the spare key my grandmother had kept there since 1965, the key she had shown me when I was 6 years old and said, "This is our secret, Claire Bear. For emergencies." This was an emergency. I wheeled around the side of the house, the path uneven, the wheels catching on roots and stones. My arms burned, my shoulders ached, but I made it. I reached beneath the third board from the left, my fingers finding the cool metal, and pulled out the key. The back door opened with a creak that sounded like a sigh. The kitchen was exactly as I remembered. The yellow cabinets, the farmhouse sink, the ceramic rooster on the windowsill that had been my grandmother's. But it smelled different, stale, empty. The air was still, undisturbed, as if the house had been holding its breath since the day I left. I wheeled through the living room, my eyes darting everywhere, looking for changes, for signs of David's presence, for evidence of the sale. But everything was as it had been. The furniture was still there, the photographs on the mantel, the quilt over the back of the sofa. It was as if the house had been frozen in amber, waiting. The staircase loomed ahead. I stared at it. 12 steps. Steep, narrow, carpeted in a runner that had been worn thin by decades of feet. At the top, a landing. To the right, the bathroom and the spare bedroom. To the left, the narrow door that led to the attic. I couldn't walk. I couldn't crawl. My legs were dead weight, unresponsive, betraying me at the moment I needed them most. But I had arms. I had shoulders. I had a rage that had been building for weeks, compressed into a diamond-hard point of will. I positioned my wheelchair at the base of the stairs. I locked the brakes. I reached for the banister, and I pulled. The first step was the hardest. My arms, strong as they had become, were not designed for this. My body was not designed for this. I dragged myself upward, my useless legs trailing behind me like anchors, my hips scraping against the edges of each step, pain flaring sharp and bright with every movement. By the third step, I was sweating. By the sixth, I was shaking. By the ninth, I was seeing spots, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my vision narrowing to a tunnel. But I made it. I hauled myself onto the landing, my chest heaving, my arms trembling with exhaustion. I lay there for a moment, sprawled on the worn carpet, listening to the house breathe around me. Then I dragged myself toward the attic door. It was unlocked. The attic was hot, close, filled with the smell of old paper and dust and time. Light filtered through a small window, illuminating the rows of trunks, the stacks of boxes, the shapes of forgotten things. And there, on a shelf near the water heater, was the black box with its blinking lights, the security system hard drive. I crawled to it, my hands raw, my clothes soaked with sweat. I reached up, my fingers finding the USB port, and inserted the flash drive Jen had given me. The drive I had hidden in my bra, the one place David never looked. The files began to copy. I sat there panting, my back against the wall, and watched the progress bar crawl across the screen. 87 days of footage, 4 cameras, hundreds of hours. It would take time. While I waited, I looked around the attic. My grandmother's things, my mother's things, my things. Boxes labeled in my childish handwriting, Claire's treasures, do not open. I had been 12 when I wrote that. I had been so sure of the permanence of everything. My eyes fell on a trunk I didn't recognize. Not my grandmother's, not mine. A modern trunk, black, with a combination lock. David's. I dragged myself over to it. The lock was a simple 3-digit combination. I tried our anniversary. Nothing. I tried his birthday. Nothing. I tried my birthday. It clicked open. Inside, files, folders, papers, and bottles. Small bottles, prescription bottles. Empty. The labels had been removed, but I recognized the shape. I recognized the pharmacy stamp on the bottom of one. Lorazepam. My lorazepam. The medication I took occasionally for anxiety, the medication David had started reminding me to take more regularly in the months before the coma. "You're so stressed," he'd say. "You need to sleep. You need to rest." There were dozens of empty bottles, enough to sedate an elephant, enough to keep someone unconscious long enough for carbon monoxide to do its work. Beneath the bottles was a file. Insurance policies. I opened it. Life insurance. 2 policies. One through David's work, one private. Both taken out within the last 18 months. Both naming David as sole beneficiary. Both worth more than the house. I stared at the numbers. I stared at the bottles. I stared at the trunk that had been hidden in my attic, in my house, among my grandmother's things. The flash drive beeped. Copy complete. I unplugged it. I shoved it back into my bra. I closed the trunk, reset the lock, and dragged myself back to the stairs. Descending was harder than ascending. I had to lower myself step by step, controlling my fall with my arms, my shoulders screaming, my hands slipping on the carpet. Twice I almost lost my grip. Twice I caught myself, my heart hammering, my breath ragged. I reached the bottom in a heap, my wheelchair still locked at the base of the stairs. I dragged myself into it, my body shaking with exertion and shock, and a cold, hard fury that was beginning to feel like power. I wheeled out the back door. I locked it. I replaced the key. Jen was in the driveway, her eyes on her phone, her posture tense. When she saw me, she exhaled sharply. 53 minutes, she said. I was about to come in after you. Drive, I said. Please. Just drive. She drove. I clutched the flash drive against my chest, feeling its edges dig into my skin, feeling its weight like a talisman. I didn't speak. I couldn't. The words I had were too large for my throat, too jagged for my mouth. Back at the facility, Jen helped me into bed. She didn't ask what I had found. She didn't need to. My face must have told her everything. What's next? She asked. Court, I said. My voice was steady now, steadier than it had been since I woke up. I need a lawyer, a good one. And I need to get out of here, out of this facility, away from David. I know someone, Jen said. A lawyer. She helped me with my ex. She specializes in situations like this. Predatory guardianships, financial abuse. I'll call her today. Thank you, I said. The words were inadequate. They were crumbs. But they were all I had. Jen squeezed my hand. Get some rest, Claire. You look like you've been to war. I had been. I was. And the war was only beginning. The lawyer's name was Anita Voss. She was 60, gray-haired, with eyes the color of steel and a voice that sounded like gravel and authority. She came to the facility the next day, during David's absence, and sat in the chair beside my bed with a legal pad and a pen that clicked aggressively. Tell me everything, she said. I did. I started with the letter and ended with the flash drive. I laid out the timeline, the documents, the bottles, the insurance policies. I spoke for an hour without stopping, my voice growing hoarse, my hands trembling, but my mind clear. So clear. Like a lens that had finally been focused. Anita listened without interrupting. She took notes. Her pen scratched against the paper, a sound that felt like progress, like building. When I finished, she set down her pen. He's committed multiple felonies, she said. Attempted murder, fraud, forgery, because I guarantee you didn't sign those guardianship papers while in a coma. Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and the sale of the house can be contested. Guardians can't sell property without court approval, and even then, the proceeds must be held for the ward's benefit. If he moved the money into personal accounts, that's embezzlement. Can I get the house back? I asked. That depends on the buyer. If they were bona fide purchasers, meaning they bought in good faith, without knowledge of the fraud, we might not be able to reverse the sale. But we can sue David for the value. And if the buyers weren't bona fide, if David knew them, if there was collusion, then yes, we can unwind the whole thing. And the criminal charges? That's up to the district attorney. But with the evidence you've described, I'd be shocked if they didn't prosecute. The security footage will be key. If it shows him tampering with the carbon monoxide detector, or administering medication, or anything suspicious in the days leading up to your coma. I haven't watched it yet, I admitted. I don't have a computer here. And David, we'll be here in 2 hours. Anita finished. She stood, straightening her jacket. Here's what we're going to do. I'm filing an emergency motion to terminate the guardianship. Today, based on your recovery and the evidence of his misconduct. I'm also filing for a restraining order. He won't be allowed within 500 feet of you, and I'm petitioning the court to freeze all accounts he has access to, pending a full accounting. Will it work? I asked. Anita looked at me, really looked at me, at the woman in the hospital bed, paralyzed, abandoned, betrayed. And she smiled. It was a small smile, tight, fierce. Mrs. Bennett, she said, I've been practicing law for 35 years. I've seen judges grant guardianships over a cup of coffee and terminate them over a mountain of evidence. You have a mountain. And you have something else. What? You're alive, against his plans, against his expectations. That makes you the most dangerous witness in the world. She left. I lay back against the pillows, my heart racing, my mind spinning. Dangerous. I had never thought of myself as dangerous. I had been nice. I had been accommodating. I had been the kind of woman who said yes and thank you and I'm fine when I wasn't. But that woman was gone. She had died in the dark, somewhere between the coma and the awakening, and the woman who had risen in her place was someone I was only beginning to know. David arrived at 2, as always. He brought tulips. He brought a new novel. He brought his smile, his tears, his performance of devoted husband. But this time, he didn't get past the nurse's station. Mr. Bennett? The head nurse, a stern woman named Patricia, intercepted him. I'm afraid you can't go in. David blinked. What? Why? I'm her husband. I've been visiting every day for 3 months. There's been a court order, a restraining order. You're not permitted to see Mrs. Bennett or be on these premises. I couldn't see his face from my bed, but I could imagine it. The confusion sliding into panic, the panic hardening into something else. Calculation, perhaps, or rage. There's been a mistake, he said, his voice carrying down the hallway. My wife needs me. She's not well. She's confused. She doesn't know what she's doing. I suggest you contact your attorney, Mr. Bennett. The police have been notified. If you don't leave voluntarily, you'll be removed. There was a long pause, then footsteps, retreating, quick and angry. I closed my eyes. I didn't feel victory. I felt relief, thin and trembling like a wire stretched too tight. He was gone. For now. But he knew. He knew I was awake in more ways than one, and he would be planning his next move. Anita called that evening. The emergency hearing was scheduled for Monday, 4 days away. I needed to be prepared to testify, to explain my condition, my recovery, my evidence. To sit in a courtroom, in my wheelchair, and tell a judge that my husband had tried to kill me. There's one more thing, Anita said. I ran a background check on David, on his finances. He's in debt, Claire, deep debt, gambling mostly, online casinos, sports betting. He lost almost everything over the last 2 years. The house, your house, was his only way out. He needed the equity to pay off creditors who were getting impatient. The pieces clicked into place. The new sweater, the distracted phone calls, the meetings that had grown more frequent, more urgent. He hadn't been working late. He had been gambling. He had been sinking. And instead of telling me, instead of asking for help, he had decided to erase me and start over with my money. And the buyers? I asked. A shell company, registered in Delaware. I'm tracing the ownership, but it's layered. He was smart about that at least. But not smart enough. No one is smart enough to hide everything. I spent the weekend preparing. Jen helped me practice my testimony, asking me questions in a harsh voice, making me repeat the hard parts until I could say them without crying. I watched the security footage on Anita's laptop, in her office, my eyes burning from the screen. It was all there. David, on the night before my coma, climbing the stairs to the attic, carrying a bag, staying for 20 minutes, descending. The carbon monoxide detector in the hallway. Him pausing, reaching up, his body blocking the camera for 30 seconds. When he moved away, the detector looked the same. But I knew. I knew he had disabled it, or tampered with it, or done something to ensure it wouldn't alert me when the gas began to fill the house. And earlier, days earlier, him crushing pills into my evening tea. I watched him do it in the kitchen, his back to the camera, his shoulders moving with the motion of a mortar and pestle. I watched him stir the tea. I watched him bring it to me in the living room, where I sat reading, unsuspecting, trusting. I watched myself drink it. I watched myself grow drowsy. I watched myself stumble to bed. I watched him watch me, standing in the doorway, his face blank, his eyes empty. I vomited after that. Anita handed me a trash can and a bottle of water, and she didn't say anything, and I was grateful. Monday arrived like a verdict. The courtroom was small, wood-paneled, smelling of old paper and floor polish. I wheeled myself in, my arms strong now, my posture straight. I wore a black dress that Jen had brought me, simple, severe. I had applied my own makeup, my hands steady. I looked, Anita said, like a woman who had survived something. Like a woman who was not to be underestimated. David was already there. He sat at the defendant's table with his own lawyer, a young man in an ill-fitting suit who looked like he had drawn the short straw. David's eyes found mine as I entered. For a moment, something flickered there. Fear? Regret? Or just the calculation of a man measuring the distance between what he had planned and what was actually happening. The judge was a woman. Eleanor Vance. 65, sharp-featured, with reading glasses perched on her nose and a gavel she used sparingly. She had a reputation for fairness and a low tolerance for bullshit. Anita had chosen our judge well. The hearing began. Anita laid out the facts with the precision of a surgeon. The guardianship, obtained fraudulently. The sale of the house, conducted without proper authority. The financial transfers, the hidden debts, the insurance policies. She introduced the security footage, the empty pill bottles, the bank records. She built a case so solid, so undeniable, that David's lawyer looked increasingly like a man trying to bail water with a sieve. Then it was my turn. I wheeled myself to the witness stand. The court officer swore me in. I placed my hand on the Bible and felt nothing, no reverence, no fear, just the cool leather of the cover and the steady beat of my own heart. Mrs. Bennett, Anita began, can you tell the court what happened on the night of March 14th? I spoke. I described the tea, the drowsiness, the darkness. I described waking up 3 months later to a letter congratulating me on the sale of my home. I described finding the guardianship papers, the bank statements, the trunk in the attic. My voice was clear. My hands were still. I did not cry. And your current medical condition? Anita asked. Temporary paralysis below the waist, I said, caused by oxygen deprivation during the coma. The doctors believe I will walk again, with continued therapy. Caused by your husband's actions? Objection, David's lawyer said, rising. Speculation. Sustained, Judge Vance said. But she was looking at David. Her expression was not friendly. Mrs. Bennett, Anita continued, how has this experience affected you? I paused. I looked at David. He was staring at the table, his jaw tight, his hands clenched. I used to believe that love was a safe place, I said. I used to believe that marriage meant someone would catch you if you fell. I was wrong. But I also learned something else. I learned that I am stronger than I knew. That I can survive things I never imagined. That I can fight back. Even from a wheelchair, especially from a wheelchair. The courtroom was silent. And what do you want, Mrs. Bennett? Anita asked. From this court? From this process? I want my life back, I said. I want my house back. I want justice. And I want him to know that he failed, that I'm awake, that I'm here, that he didn't win. Anita nodded. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, we request the immediate termination of the guardianship, the reversal of the property sale on grounds of fraud, the freezing of all marital assets pending equitable distribution, and the issuance of a permanent restraining order. We also request that this matter be referred to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. David's lawyer stood. He spoke of due process, of the presumption of innocence, of the need for further investigation before destroying a man's reputation. His words were correct, legally sound, and utterly unconvincing. Judge Vance listened. She removed her glasses. She polished them with a cloth. She replaced them. Mr. Bennett, she said, her voice carrying the weight of finality. The evidence presented today is deeply troubling. The security footage alone raises serious questions about your conduct. The financial records suggest a pattern of deception and exploitation, and the circumstances of Mrs. Bennett's incapacitation are, at best, suspicious. She turned to me. Mrs. Bennett, the guardianship is terminated, effective immediately. You are hereby restored to full legal capacity. The sale of 42 Maplewood Lane is set aside pending further investigation into the bona fides of the purchaser. All marital assets are frozen, and the restraining order is made permanent. She banged her gavel. Once, sharp, definitive. Mr. Bennett, you are remanded into custody pending arraignment on charges to be determined by the district attorney. Bailiff? I watched them take him away. He didn't struggle. He didn't speak. He just looked at me. One last time. And in his eyes I saw something I hadn't expected. Not hatred. Not rage. Resignation. He had known perhaps from the moment I woke up. He had known that the Claire he had tried to erase was not the Claire who would stay buried. He had known, and he had hoped. And now his hope was as dead as my legs had been. The courtroom emptied. Anita squeezed my shoulder. Jen, who had come to watch, was crying quietly in the back row. I wheeled myself out into the hallway. The light through the windows was bright, almost too bright, but I didn't look away. I rolled toward it, my arms strong, my heart steady, my head high. Maplewood Lane was mine again. Not just the house, but the idea of it, the possibility, the future I had almost lost. I would walk through that front door again. I would climb those stairs. I would sit on the porch and watch the oak tree sway in the wind. I would fill the rooms with life, with laughter, with the sound of my own footsteps when they finally returned. But for now, I sat in my wheelchair, in the courthouse hallway, in the light, and I was enough. The criminal trial took 8 months. David pled not guilty, of course. His lawyer argued that I had been depressed, that I had been self-medicating, that the carbon monoxide had been a tragic accident, and the financial transactions had been desperate attempts to save us from bankruptcy. He painted David as a flawed but loving husband, overwhelmed by circumstance, making bad choices in a moment of crisis. The jury didn't buy it. The security footage was damning. The pill bottles, with their pharmacy records tracing back to prescriptions filled in David's name. The insurance policies, taken out just months before my coma. The emails to the realtor, beginning weeks before the accident, discussing the sale of the house, the urgency, the need for a quick close. They convicted him on all counts: attempted murder, fraud, forgery, embezzlement. The judge sentenced him to 25 years. I was there, in the courtroom, when the verdict was read. I sat in my wheelchair, wearing the same black dress, my hands folded in my lap. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just listened to the foreperson say the word guilty and felt something inside me shift, like a door closing that had been open for too long. Afterward, reporters surrounded me. They asked how I felt. They asked if I forgave him. They asked if I had a message for other women in abusive relationships. I looked at the cameras. I thought about what to say. There were so many words, so many lessons, so many warnings I could offer. But in the end, I said only this: check the attic camera, David. It wasn't kind. It wasn't noble. It was the truth. Sharp and small and final. The detail he had missed. The oversight that had cost him everything. The thread I had pulled that unraveled the whole tapestry of his lies. I wheeled away. The reporters called after me, but I didn't stop. I had somewhere to be. Physical therapy. My daily battle. My daily proof. Jen pushed me harder now. She had been promoted to senior therapist, and she had made me her personal project. We worked on standing first. Using parallel bars, a harness, my arms doing most of the work while my legs hung useless, dead weight reminders of what I had lost. But slowly, so slowly, sensation returned. It began as tingling. Pins and needles in my toes, like the limb was waking from a sleep deeper than any I had known. Then warmth. Then the faintest whisper of movement, a twitch of a muscle I couldn't name, a flicker of life in the darkness. I cried the first time I wiggled my big toe. Jen cried too. We sat in the therapy room, two women who had been strangers a year ago, now bound by something stronger than friendship, and we wept like children. Walking came next. First with a walker, my arms bearing most of my weight, my legs dragging behind me like reluctant passengers. Then with canes. Then, finally, alone. My first steps were across the living room of Maplewood Lane. The house was mine again. Fully, legally, irrevocably. The buyers, the shell company, traced back to one of David's gambling creditors, had been forced to relinquish the deed. The house was empty when I returned, stripped of David's things, stripped of the contamination of his presence. I had hired cleaners. I had opened every window. I had burned sage and played music and filled the rooms with light until the shadows retreated. I stood in the doorway. I took a breath. I lifted my right foot, and I stepped inside. The floor was hardwood, polished, familiar. My grandmother's rug still lay in the hallway, faded but intact. The ceramic rooster still watched from the kitchen windowsill. The oak tree still cast its shadow through the front windows, dappling the walls with green and gold. I walked to the staircase. 12 steps. Steep, narrow, worn. I climbed them. 1, 2, 3. My legs shook. My lungs burned. But I kept going. 4, 5, 6. I thought of David, of the attic, of the night I had dragged myself up these same stairs on my arms, half dead with exhaustion, driven by a rage I hadn't known I possessed. 7, 8, 9. I thought of the coma, of the dark, of the nothing that had tried to swallow me. 10, 11, 12. I reached the landing. I stood there, breathing hard, my hand on the wall for balance, and I looked down at the hallway below. I had done it. I walked to the attic door. I opened it. I climbed the narrow stairs. Easier now. My legs stronger. My body remembering what it had been. The black box still sat on its shelf. The cameras still blinked. But I didn't need them anymore. I had what I needed. I had my life. I had my home. I had my legs. Returning, step by step. I sat on an old trunk, my grandmother's, not David's, and I looked around the attic. The trunks, the boxes, the history. I was part of that history now. Not the part I would have chosen. Not the part I had expected. But a part nonetheless. The part where the woman woke up. The part where she fought back. The part where she won. I heard a sound from downstairs. The front door opening. Jen's voice. Calling up. Claire? You up there? I brought lunch. Coming. I called back. My voice was strong. Clear. Unafraid. I stood. I walked to the stairs. I descended, one step at a time, into the light, into the noise, into the life that was waiting for me. The wheelchair sat in the corner of the living room. I kept it. I didn't need it anymore, not for walking, but I needed it for remembering, for the days when I felt weak, when I doubted myself, when the past crept in with its shadows and its whispers. I would look at that chair, and I would remember. I would remember that I had been broken and rebuilt, that I had been betrayed and survived, that I had been paralyzed and learned to walk again, in every sense that mattered. I would remember that the darkest rooms hold the most important truths, that the attic camera sees everything, that the woman who wakes up is always stronger than the one who fell asleep. And I would remember David, not with hate. Hate was too heavy a burden, too expensive a currency. I would remember him as a lesson, as a warning, as the catalyst for a transformation I never knew I needed. He had tried to bury me. He didn't know I was a seed. I walked into the kitchen. Jen had set out sandwiches, lemonade, a vase of tulips. She smiled at me, her phoenix tattoo catching the light. "How are the stairs?" she asked. "Easier every day," I said. "And the house?" I looked around, at the yellow cabinets, at the farmhouse sink, at the ceramic rooster, absurd and perfect, watching over the garden. "It's home," I said. And it was.